2017 TED Talk called The Science of Storytelling, David Phillips closed his talk by noting the following timeline of human modes of communication. He says this: 100,000 years ago, humans developed language and began transferring knowledge through storytelling. 27,000 years ago, humans drew images and began transferring knowledge through cave paintings. 3,500 years ago, humans developed writing and began transferring knowledge through text. 28 years ago, PowerPoint was developed. And he asks this, he says, given that timeline, which of these modes of communication is most rooted within us as a species? Which of them is the most basic human act? And the answer, of course, is storytelling. The class is called Storytelling, so I've already led you to that conclusion. I want to make a bold assertion right now, and I want you to believe it. Every single one of us in this room is an accomplished storyteller. I mean it. Every one of us has experienced something and then transmitted the events of that experience to another person. Unless you are here and you have taken a lifelong vow of silence, you are a storyteller. It's in your DNA. Now, some stories that you've told to another person are deeply sad and tragic. They've inspired empathy and compassion. Other stories you've told have inspired laughter and joy, and they've filled the other person with that dopamine level of residual joy. Others have just been stories that advance the news, that just report the details of a situation. But because we are accomplished storytellers, all of us, the story that we told had a beginning, and it had a middle, and it had an end. It had conflict and resolution. It likely had some tension and buildup. It had characters, even if the only character in it was you. And if the other person heard it and understood it, then you are an accomplished storyteller. Your work worked. We rely on stories to develop our empathy, our compassion. We rely on stories to educate and inform. We use stories to inspire and challenge us to do something. And sometimes we even rely on stories to entertain and ignite our imaginations. Stories help us make sense of the world, of conflict, of fear, of joy. We are, as Jonathan Gottschall puts it, storytelling animals. And we've been given the unique gift of being able to transmit that knowledge in story across time and space. The ancient work of storytelling has emerged as a dominant force in the strangest places in our world today, even in board games, especially in role-playing board games, where people are immersed in a story about a different world, and they're given opportunities to take actions, fight enemies, and advance the story as a group. In the past few years, one of the most popular internet streams to watch has been the work of a group called Critical Role, a bunch of voice actors who get together on Thursday nights to play a role-playing game called Dungeons and Dragons. Every Thursday, over 100,000 young-ish people tune in live to watch this group of friends tell an intricate story of action and intrigue and romance and betrayal with no animation, no media other than the voice telling and narrating the events of what happened. Episodes run 4 hours in length. And after the event is over, 4 million viewers will watch it later that week. Watching strangers tell captivating stories and feeling drawn in yourself. We can't help but appreciate the work of story in our world. It's in our fundamental makeup as human beings. We crave stories, whether they come in the form of novels or plays or films or video games or music and song. Stories are everywhere. We can't escape from them. One of the most meaningful acts in some families is that sacred act of gathering around a dinner table and telling the old stories of past years and those who used to still be present in the family, those who have died, telling stories of old houses and times of scarcity and moments of joy that swell your heart with warmth and hope and memory. Telling stories is how we learn to trust one another, how we forge those special bonds of friendship and kinship. Telling stories to one another opens us up, it exposes us, it proves that we too are, in fact, vulnerable humans. Show me any healthy community of people, and I will show you a people who have become good at telling and listening to stories. I grew up in Mott Park in the late 80s and 1990s. The houses were small. My mint green house in the central block of Thomas Street was just about 1,100 square feet of living space. The yard was equally small, square-like, like a postage stamp, about 50 feet across, and split into two sections by a sidewalk. Most houses in my neighborhood had detached garages, as they were built at a time when people didn't prioritize privacy as much as we do now, with our houses where we pull into a garage and enter our house without our neighbors even noticing we've come home. These small cookie-cutter houses all had front porches, even if they were just small cement stoops. And I remember many summer nights sitting on the lower step as my parents talked to our neighbors, telling stories to one another as the dusk settled in. The Plouches lived next door on one side, and the Nemais lived on the other. The Hawcrofts lived across the street, and poor Dorothy Stoutenberg lived next to them. Poor Dorothy, who parked her tidy white sedan on the wrong day as a 15-year-old boy who was learning how to drive told his dad, "I knew how to back up the red conversion van." Crunch, $1,500 worth of repairs. We knew our neighbors. They watched our cats when we were gone, and we watched their plants when they were gone. Their yards were part of our play space, and when they needed help weeding or mowing or trimming, we pitched in. We knew them enough to share cookies at Christmas time and to catch up on the latest neighborhood gossip. But 3 doors down from us lived a man who lived on his own. I don't know his name. He never answered his door. His light was always off at Halloween, and he never said thank you or acknowledged the gift of cookies my mom had delivered when we moved in. For 12 years that I lived there, we never saw him enter his house or leave his house. We didn't know if he had children or grandchildren. We never saw him, ever. So naturally, we started telling ghost stories about the house. And especially about the old man who lived inside. It was a haunted house to us kids, haunted because it was empty of story. It was a shell of a home, without the warmth of storytelling emanating from its windows or its front porch. And to this day, I remember many things about the neighbors that we knew, but I still don't know even this man's name who lived 3 doors down from me. He was part of our community on Thomas Street, but his story was never told to us, and neither was ours to him. He was a living ghost to our neighborhood. He was alive, we think, but he was not part of our shared story. Because in the end, I think that it is in the telling of stories that we become alive to one another. It's in the telling of stories that we are woven into one another's lives. Storytelling is at the heart of our human existence. But storytelling is also at the heart of our religious practice too. As Christians, we are story-driven people. At the heart of our faith is a story, and not just any story, but the story, the cosmic story, the story of the creation of the world, its fragmentation and brokenness, the promises of God to sojourn with us in the midst of disrepair, the redemption of all things through the dying and rising of Jesus, and the plan of God to restore all things at the end of time. If we had to use 5 words to describe the story that our faith narrates, we might use these: creation, sin, covenant, redemption, and restoration. This is the cosmic story that is played out on the pages of Scripture. It's the story that frames the pages of this book that we love. From cover to cover, we are reading fragments taken from this cosmic story. Every law and instruction, every sacrifice, every edict of every king, every prophetic sermon, every miracle of Jesus, every letter sent to the apostles, every single word is framed by this cosmic story of creation, sin, covenant, redemption, and restoration. As Presbyterians, our annual Sunday worship cycle is a whole year devoted to telling just the redemption part of this story. In fact, next Sunday is the last Sunday in this year's annual journey through this story. And on November 28th, in our renovated sanctuary, we'll begin a new storytelling cycle with the first Sunday in Advent. Indeed, from Advent to Advent, we organize our liturgical time, our colors in our space, our hymns, our prayers, our rituals are around the telling of the story of the birth, life, ministry, death, and resurrection of Jesus. We tell the story of the arrival of the Spirit at Pentecost and the story of the church's development and spread. Whenever we gather at the font for baptisms, we invoke the stories of God's work with water in the past: creation, Noah and the flood, the parting of the Red Sea, the crossing of the Jordan River, the baptism of Jesus in the river. When we gather at the table for the Lord's Supper, we tell the story of Jesus' last meal and his words to his disciples to do this in memory of me. We devote great energy to the telling of these stories: the cosmic story, the story of creation and sin, promise, redemption, restoration to one another, and even passing them on to our children. Storytelling is at the heart of our community life here at First Pres. And some of you know this, but while we are worshiping here in the chapel, our children are worshiping upstairs in spaces called worship centers. And the heart of that experience for them is listening to and participating in a story from Scripture, told by a storyteller who lovingly invites the children to remember the story of God's creation, redemption, and restoration of this world. These storytellers memorize these stories. These storytellers paste up the stories in their shower to remember them as they get ready for each week. These storytellers recite them with love and energy and imagination and wonder, and invite children as young as 4 to hear and respond to their rhythms. The story of God is at the center of our church's identity. We cannot escape from stories. They're part of our human fabric. They're part of our religious identity. And so in light of all of this, we wanted to explore a rather unusual idea for a faith formation class from now until Christmas. What if we created a whole class that was all about telling stories? And so each week, for the next 5 weeks, we're going to gather here in the chapel for the express purpose of telling stories to one another. We believe that in the telling of stories, we become emotionally invested in one another. We find connections to each other. We grow closer together, having heard each other's account of past events or moments. Here at this church, we've brainstormed 5 building blocks for faith formation, 5 essential components to the exercise of our Christian faith. One is worship. We covered that in the last 6 weeks. Community is another. Scripture, prayer, service are the 5. And so we come to community, which is our theme now, and we said, what better way to begin exercising our interconnections as community members than by hearing stories from each other? As we continue to trudge through this pandemic, we recognize that one of the things that has been lost to us in the last 15 months is the sense of connection to one another. When worship is reduced to a private, virtual-only interface, even if it's in the public interest to do so, when worship in church is no longer a communal, in-person gathering, we find ourselves drifting apart from the actual humans who sit next to us in the pews and their struggles and joys, and the participation in worship becomes something that we do not need one another to do, and that poses a threat to our communal life. And so, we thought, as we started preparing ideas for teaching about the building block of community in our Christian faith, we said that maybe one way to solve the disconnection we feel is to hear stories from one another. And so, here we are. We're here to tell stories. Each week, we'll have a different theme taken from the cosmic story, the story of God. And so you are invited to come ready to tell your story and to connect it to the story of God in creation, in sin, in promises and covenant, in redemption and restoration. You'll be invited to prepare a short story about yourself on a given topic, no more than 5 minutes in length. And we're going to put everyone who is ready to tell a story, you'll put your name in a bowl, and we will call you up to come and tell your story. Your story might be sad, it might be happy, it might be hopeful, it might be raw, it might be unfiltered, but no matter what, in the telling of your story and in the hearing of one another's stories, all in the context of God's story, I believe that we will draw closer together as a community and be better equipped to face the days and months ahead. We're here to tell stories. So welcome to your story in the story. It is going to be a wild, exciting ride. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. You're thinking, I can't do that. I don't know how to even go about telling a story. Well, let me tell you this. Last week, we tested this storytelling idea out on our church's staff. Poor victims they were. 12 of our church staff gathered for a planned all-day retreat last Monday, and with only 30 minutes of preparation, we invited each staff member to prepare a story on a given theme or question. It was a wild success. We told stories about times we had to wait for things. We told stories about times we had to wake up earlier than expected. We told stories about special meals we remembered from our childhoods. We all smiled when Dennis Goodman, our facilities manager, was invited to tell a story about how he met his wife. And he was so filled with joy and love, he got 2 sentences out and said, "I just love her so much." And we were all smitten as he was. It was effortless, it was joyful, it was filled with moments of that shared connection. Even people who were desperately nervous about getting up on a stage and telling a story did it, and they made it look easy. And if they can do it, you can do it. We gave the staff 30 minutes to prepare. We're giving you a whole week. No problem, right? But you protest, I don't even know how to tell a story. I mean, some people are just gifted storytellers. How could I be like them? So let me shift gears here and let me outline for you a few tips and tricks for preparing a story about yourself. You can find these summarized in the handout you received when you walked in today. First, and above all, you must remember that you are already a gifted storyteller. You have thousands of stories under your belt. You're trained to do this. You're ready for this. You can do it. Secondly, as you prepare, remember the theme for that week. Each week will be a theme question or a statement, an invitation to tell a story. Your story should be connected to it. For example, next week we are inviting stories about a time you made something. So don't tell a story about the fabulous vacation you had in Australia unless it is also a story about you making something. Third, as you prepare, 2 great commandments: don't lie and don't steal. Do not tell somebody else's story, and do not use hyperbole or exaggeration to make your story more glamorous than it is. Just tell the truth. What happened? Fourth, I encourage you to write it out. Those of you who are nervous about standing up and delivering something, write it out. Now listen, Paul and I have preached, each of us have preached a lot in our ministries, and we still write it out every single week. And I can probably point to you, and I don't know if Paul can do this, but I could point to the times where my sermons have often gone off the rails is when I forget to think about what I'm going to say before I say it. So it's good to write it out. Okay, in some storytelling moments, you're encouraged not to read what you've written, but here, for the sake of your own comfort, if you prefer to bring paper up to read from, by all means. Fifth, read the prompt. Each week, we'll give you an invitation, and we will give you some guiding questions, some things to think about. Now, some of you are really type A people who will see a list of questions, and you think that you just need to answer all of the questions, and your story is complete when you've answered all of the questions. Don't do that. Don't read through a list of answers to the questions we give you. Use them to help you, sort of provoke in you a story to tell. So they might be helpful. You might not answer any of them. You might answer one of them. But the idea being they're just helpful guides for you, not requirements. Take your time. 5 minutes will feel like an eternity up here. 5 minutes is plenty of time to tell the best stories. If you're writing it out on a computer and you're wondering how many words, 750 words. It's about 4 or 5 paragraphs. Not long, but tell it all. Don't waste any words. Don't tell us the whole story. Use it all to tell your story. And finally, this. Decide right now that you are going to come next week ready to tell a story. Now, we have 45 minutes, and if everyone does stick to 5 minutes, we couldn't get through everybody in this room. So we're going to draw. So you might not get drawn for the week that you're here. But that said, we want you to come ready to tell a story. And if you can't tell your story here live, there'll be plenty of time before and after for you to tell your story to those around. So come ready to tell a story. So next week, we begin the fun. We're going to change the look around in here a little bit, and we're going to invite you to come up. You'll be sitting on a chair, and you'll be invited to tell your story. And when you tell your story, you will be greeted by a group of people like you who are eager to hear it, right? We are not going to be trying to menace you with taunts or jeers. David Regal will refrain from trying to interrupt you and heckle you. We all of us here want to hear you. We want you to hear your story about a time you made something. Paul and I will be preparing stories too, though we will not go every week. We'll put our name in, and if others haven't had a chance to turn, we'll probably go at the end if there's time. So we'll prepare stories as well. And also, we're going to frame each week with a bit of scripture to ground what we're doing. So that's the challenge. That's the invitation. Do you have any questions?
Can we just be spectators?
No. Well, yes. Of course you can, George. But come ready to share a story, too.
Is there going to be a timer in the back?
Yes. What we're going to do is we're going to have a It's not going to be aggressive. We're going to put together a short on a TV screen that will just fade from green to yellow to orange to red. So you have 5 minutes, and it's just going to go. So no pressure, no one in the back holding up cards. You'll know. And if everyone gets up and walks out, then your time has expired, and you can wrap it up. Yes, Linda.
Can it be 1 or 2 minutes?
It can be short, though, but make sure you're telling the whole story. Yep. Others? When you think about something you've made, practice using good descriptive words to help us see or think about the thing that you've made. Help us be connected to it the way you're connected to it. And be creative. Be out of the box. If there's another way of thinking about making something, take us there. Tell us that. We'd love to hear it. Other questions? All right. It's going to be a fun journey. Paul, do you have any thoughts you want to wrap up with?
No, I'm just really excited.
All right. All right. So plan on coming back next week, and as you go, start asking people, what are you going to tell a story about? Put some pressure on people. And for the people who didn't come today, don't tell them what we're doing. We'll do a little random draw. No, I'm just kidding. But do encourage people to come. I think the more participation we have, even in the hearing, I think will be a blessing to our community. So that's the end of our introductory class today. Thank you so much. By my watch, it's 11:49, so you've got about 10 minutes to chat or talk. And if you haven't, I think the cake's all put away, so sorry about that. But all right, go in peace. Thank you so much. We'll see you back next week for more fun.